Good morning, everybody. My name is Lee George, and I am the Director of Marketing here at the James J. Hill Center. Thanks so much for being here today. You are at our second panel discussion all about funding. The reason we are doing these is because I've talked with many of you, Paul's talked with many of you, a lot of people around here have talked with many of you, and there is a need or desire for there to be more education around different types of funding for small businesses and entrepreneurs of where do you go, why do you go, what are you giving up by going there. And so we just did our bootstrapping and early stage investment about 2 weeks ago, and today is all about non-debt funding. And we got a great couple of speakers here today. And we have our moderator slash facilitator, Nick Powley, right here. Nicholas Powley is a self-described invention enthusiast for more than a decade. He has been helping innovators visualize new product concepts and validate value creation hypotheses. With a mechanical engineering degree from MIT and experience in creating new ventures, Nick enjoys serving the community and supporting CoCreateX.com, which is a wonderful group and community. And Nick currently works at 3M on the Infection Prevention Division as the new product discovery team, or on the new product discovery team. So thank you, Nick, for being here, and thanks for moderating our panel. I'll turn it over to you.
My pleasure. So again, thank you, Lee, and thank you everyone this morning for coming. It's really wonderful to be here, and this is my first time at this Funders panel, but I expect to keep coming back as an audience member, if not in any other capacity. But anyway, so our agenda this morning, or our lineup, is we're going to have two presentations. The first one will be by Brad Connor, and I'll introduce him in just a second. And then the second one will be by Pat Dillon, and I'll introduce her just before her talk. And then after that, we'll have a question and answer and a bit of a panel discussion. So again, thank you for coming. And with no further ado, I will introduce Brad. So Brad is the founder of Business Development for Partners Funding. As a leader within the corporate and entrepreneurial arena, the insights have been valuable as Brad helps businesses understand the opportunities within the invoice funding field. Understanding the what is not even half the battle, and I would agree with that. Understanding the why and when a business would want to use this tool is obviously very important. From his personal experience, invoice funding factoring should be an essential component of the business finance arsenal. With the business Brad has previously owned, invoice funding and factoring would have been the exact tool needed in order to support those companies. And Brad is very interested in sharing all of his experience with that with you here today. So why don't we welcome Brad?
Okay. Thank you, Nick. Well, thank you. I think I'm going to stand where Nick was here. Appreciate it. And Lee, thank you for spearheading this. And I've related to a few people about a little bit of my experience in panel situations and in talking with entrepreneurs and so on. And, one comes to mind in Fort Dodge, Iowa, that unfortunately all centered to the fact that maybe the bank was the only place to get the funding. And I felt really like the information wasn't totally correct, that there are other opportunities, other ways to look at funding, where the long-term credit in the bank, of course, is the way to go in the long term. But, and so I'm really pleased that Lee began spearheading this series. So again, my name is Brad, as Nick said, and we're going to talk about the exciting realm of invoice factoring and hopefully related to a couple of stories. And Kathy's smiling. That's right, it is. So just a little bit about Partners Funding. We're out of Fairmont, Minnesota. I drove up this morning, left about 4:30, and one deer, 2 raccoon, and 1 skunk. And that's in the fog, so I'm not sure what I didn't see. 1995, we started, we're independently owned, we have 2 owners, and pretty much started in the commercial transportation industry. 2006, we opened up Partners Funding. That's the division I primarily work in, and that's the business side, working with small to medium-sized businesses. I put this available, well, you know what, this is the second time I get to use this, so I'm so happy. I put this here available to help with any questions. What I mean by that is any realm, anything within the finance industry, anything that I can help with. And Tom Thompson. We had a talk earlier this morning about that, and I gave him a resource to, or reminding each other about a resource to look into as he grows and as he goes on. So one of the advantages that we have in this industry is working with a lot of different funding sources, and we're able to relay that knowledge to. Basically, my bios, I worked in big companies, made a decision to give up the six-figure income and go into the entrepreneur realm. My wife and I did that for 10 or 12 years, as Nick alluded to. And, how smart was that decision? I think it was the best decision of my life. I didn't make a lot of money, but I really, really enjoyed it. But sometimes you got to question your decisions, because I'm the guy, too, that had a 1970 GTO judge that traded it in for a Pinto. How many people remember a Pinto? So hopefully that doesn't taint you with how, what you think of me here. But and also I have a night job here. That's me about Christmas time, doing a lot of different things. The goal today, just understanding the what, the why, when, as Nick said, and the caveats, and just awareness of factoring and what it can and cannot do, and I'll cover a couple other areas after that too. Basically, the definition, at least that I purport, is accelerating cash flow through next day funding of an overlooked resource, and that would be your accounts receivable or your invoices, and it allows you flexibility then to take advantage of opportunities. And I put B2B, it's business to business, not business to consumer in that realm. So that's kind of the realm we work in, and that works for, we'll go through this, examples, new businesses, existing businesses, and so on. So just to kind of look at it visually, it's here you are, your invoices, sent it to whoever. I would have actually put factoring company in there, but I don't know how to do it. And then you get cash for your invoices next day, basically. So it's taking your invoice, turning it into the factoring company puts the money in the bank the next day. That's the simple part of it. But again, as Nick read, why would you even do this kind of thing? The viewpoint of factoring that I take, maybe competitors don't, I don't know, but generally it's kind of a short-term or a long-term. So short-term in the sense of getting you from point A to B. What do you want to accomplish? Is it growth? Is it a new piece of equipment to get you that growth? And again, we'll go through that. Or it could be long-term. We have several companies that just hate receivables. They cannot handle it. And we end up being the receivables arm, basically. So the process, which I hate this term, that's why I put in quotation marks, is purchasing agreed upon receivables, paying the invoiced amount within 24 hours, and collecting funds from the client's customers. This right here probably is the number one, and I don't know about other companies, concern. Molly and I talked about that earlier. And now there's a third party involved in the transaction. Is it transparent? Do they know? Well, they generally know, because we're just asking them to send the check to a different address. That's pretty much it. But they'll know because of that. So there's a whole process we go through to make sure that that is not an issue, and in talking with clients and so on. What is the advantage of doing it? And do I just press the orange button again? That's my grandsons, by the way. So the time value is really, you hear that a lot about bank, through the bank and through finances. Time value of money. Would you rather get $18,000 or just $1,000? And this is actually a true story prior to my experience in factoring, but a friend I knew who would invoice the $1,000. And they'd wait 30 days to get that in. And hopefully they had a lot of cash and things so they could continue to produce product and keep the business going. If they didn't, they're just waiting for the $1,000 invoice and the gross profit from there. With factoring, you take that invoice, get the money that goes into your bank account, pay your supplier, produce product again, and go out and sell again, do the same thing, and continue on for whatever time period that makes sense. And I've got an actual example I hand out that shows the $18,000 gross margin, for example, versus just 1,000 invoicing. And I will ask for apologize. We're redoing our website, and I'm the one that suggested doing it, so you know what happens then, I do it. So now I'm doing some graphics, and these are my graphics. They're not from the marketing agency or anything. So basically, you know, what's the power of factoring? And we've got about 5 minutes left. Cash flow, obviously. Well, so basically, just imagine, you take your receivables, now you're in front of your payables. So imagine turning your invoices into cash flow, and you can take advantage of opportunities. This is one of those ones that are really bad. I couldn't figure out the little triangle, just right. You know, in essence, you know, this line here is your break-even cost with factoring. You've got this whole area here. Can you get a return for that investment? If you can beat that break-even cost, one way to look at it. And like any good investor, it's what you do with the receivables or the cash to gain the maximum return for your organization. So cost then becomes a non-issue, and I'm sure we can talk back and forth about that, but if you're just thinking about getting from A to B, cost really shouldn't be a concern. You obviously have to have margin to cover that, but just think about point B. From a new business venture standpoint, what happens is, of course, there's not a lot of history. There's not a lot of assets, possibly in some cases. So other lending sources potentially they may require a couple of years or a year. And so but factoring is not in that realm necessarily. What we'll do is we'll put a lot more weight on the customer if there's a little history with the business. Because again, we're working with that customer to make sure the funds get in. And to further define factoring in the invoice, I mean, factoring is specifically the product has to be shipped, received, and invoiced. That's factoring. And I'll refer to that at the end because I'll just talk to GoFundMe just briefly at the end. Power of factoring is growth, and this was my situation in my business. And basically, what happened, you know, I had X amount of growth. And I figured I needed $209,000 for that. And so kind of right here. We're factoring actually because you're getting the cash, paying the supplies right away, and being able to grow. Your gross income, you're getting gross income all along the way. That's taking care of any cost of factoring along the way. So you don't have to worry about having that amount of money in. Hopefully everybody can see this. This is my business. The last one I had 6 years ago, closed it September 15, 2009, sold it about 3 weeks later. So I actually closed it, sold it out of frustration because I wasn't getting any help. I needed to grow. I needed to grow $1 million. And two, so it's significant. And nobody told me about factoring. I had no clue. I didn't know anything about it. So basically, here's the receivables you need right here. I would have needed $29,000. But that receivables, if you're factoring, kind of goes away. And you're generating gross income, and basically it would cost me $8,000 to grow $1 million on top of two. So in essence, I could have internally funded it. You know, another use and the power of factoring is targeting a large customer. Or if you have a customer that has high concentrations, 50% of your business, traditional lending sources get a little nervous possibly on that. here's a way to get everybody comfortable, is maybe factor the invoice. And so what you've got is, for example, product price, what's your production unit cost without the customer? If you had the customer, what's your production unit cost, including factoring? Is it less? And maybe something, again, to look at, and then everybody gets comfortable, and within a period of time, traditional lending sources might be able to pick that up as far as your credit line and so on. This is another bad thing here. I didn't even finish it, but yeah, the basic idea is seasonal business fluctuations. You're doing fine, all of a sudden summer comes along. My problem entirely. So all of a sudden all this cash is needed. Well, you can kind of level that out with factoring and make sure you get everything paid. This one's even worse. And I apologize again, but accounts receivable management. A couple of ways to look at it. The cost of accounts receivable, the cost of factoring. And I actually am working with a prospect, a client that spending all of their time on the accounts receivable. One of the owners are. And so if we could free that up, it's actually going to be less if you figure her time. Your factoring, she's going to be able to take her bag business to the gift shops, wholesale around the country, and get additional revenue. So how much is that? The additional revenue, and not having to worry about accounts receivable. So this was kind of a specialized case because she was doing it 30 days a month. And finally, just flexibility. And here they take advantage of vendor discounts, special purchase, equipment purchase, keep your R&D going, and so on. The process basically of factoring is the invoice is forwarded to the factoring company. The amount funded could be 87%, for example, could be 88. And there's a holdback. The amount that the client owes the factoring company is that. And so the net fee might be 83. And of course, fees are anywhere from 1 to 5.5%, 6, 7%, probably more like between 1 and 5. So company considerations when you're looking at factoring, just these sorts of no contract sign up, short-term contract, factor one customer, or their minimums, or the credit limits placed on the customer, things to ask about. And non-debt, just quickly, the reason we call this non-debt, if you look at the balance sheet, you're really just transferring here your receivables to cash. You're working in this area, you're not working in the liabilities section. So other potential industries of help, and I mentioned PO funding. PO funding kind of takes a step back. We don't do that. Some companies also do factoring, or they're separate PO companies. If you have to order product from China, for example, and they require money up front, and Walmart gave you a PO, you can take that PO and turn it into a company for cash. Much riskier. Don't even recommend it, but it's some options, and I think we might have talked about crowdfunding before. There is a test. I didn't tell anybody that. So how long has factoring been in existence? A, B, C, or D? 25, 50, 100, or 4,000 years? Any guesses?
4,000.
D. Perfect. What industry was it initially focused in? Grain, textiles, precious metals.
Grain.
B. B. Who said B? Uh-oh, right. Yeah, I'm sure about something. Sorry. What is the current size industry volume?
D. No, C.
C. And that's it. All right, well, okay, thank you. Appreciate it. I'm sure there's time for questions.
And the question answering was remarkable. So anyway, I'll now introduce Pat. So Pat is the director at MEDA, and she's been a passionate advocate for technology innovation and entrepreneurship that support local and state and national economic goals and initiatives. For more than 20 years, Pat has been helping small, high-tech businesses to successfully compete and win federal funding through the $2.3 billion annual federal small business innovation research and small business technology transfer programs. Pat has assisted more than 100 firms to secure $50 million, leading to jobs, new products and services, investment capital, intellectual property, and wealth creation. She has a proven experience in program management, strategic planning, federal government research and development funding programs, commercialization strategies, technical proposal writing, and grant and contract management. So thank you, Pat, for coming this morning.
Well, I forgot my thumb drive at home, so you won't have to look at the wall for a presentation. But you should have a copy of what I'll be covering this morning. So with that...
Does anyone not have a
So thank you, Lee, for inviting me. So as you just heard, I have a lot of experience with the federal SBIR and STTR programs. So I'd like to get a sense of who's here that's actually knows about it. And Jim, you can't say anything. So who's heard of it before? All right. What do you think it is? No, I'm not going to answer this.
I think it is a grant program for small businesses. It looks like it's geared towards biologics to a certain degree, or research.
Okay.
Money for early stage leaders.
All right. Anybody else want to chime in? All right. How long has it been around?
4,000 years. You didn't mention us earlier.
Well, actually, like the human race, we've been doing research and development for a long time. Invention of the wheel.
I didn't say you've been around.
No, I haven't been around for 4,000. Don't look great for that. All right, so who wants to take a gander at when SBIR was created? All right, 1982. President Reagan signed it into law. And since that time, there's been over about $40 billion awarded to small businesses around the country, startups and existing companies. And it does include biologics, but it's any area, science and technology, where we need to do the R&D at the very fuzzy front end. So here's factoring on this end of the spectrum. SBIR and STTR is over here at this end. So it's your innovative idea or concept that has commercial potential that could be a good candidate for the federal SBIR and STTR programs. How many agencies participate? 22. No, federal agencies. How many? 11. Although it's been changed now to 12. And the SBA, which Small Business Administration, has oversight, an administrative oversight of the SBIR program. So now when you look at the SBIR.gov website, which is part of my presentation, you'll see that there's 12 agencies. So it's 11 federal agencies plus the Small Business Administration. $2.6 billion each fiscal year is allocated towards the SBIR and STTR programs. So a small company, entrepreneur, startup, that's got an innovative idea or concept with commercial potential can look at the SBIR, STTR programs as a way to fund the research and development that's needed to move it along towards commercialization. So the challenge is, for a lot of small businesses, is you got your idea, it's your passion, it's your baby, and then there's this big federal government with this program, and you say, well, where do I start? You can start with SBIR.gov, you can do technology topic searches, which is really important. So you have to really figure out which agency has an interest in what you're doing. That's your customer. So you want to be able to do that research at SBIR.gov. You can also come and work with MEDA, with the MN SBIR program, which is the program that I head up. So I work with a lot of companies, startup and existing, from getting to the point of, well, I've got this idea, this concept with commercial potential, but I don't know which agency, or how I should structure my research project. Should I involve Mayo Clinic? Should I involve the University of Minnesota? Should I involve a big company? Should I involve subcontractors, consultants? What is this going to cost? The program is set up into 3 phases. Phase 1 is where we're going to support the technical feasibility of the idea or the concept. So with a little bit of money, generally about $150,000, will support that early stage research that you have to do to prove that the idea's got merit, scientific and technical merit. If you get successful through phase 1, then you can request funding through phase 2, which is up to $1 million, depending upon the agency. So we work with a lot of companies in a lot of different science and technology areas. Medical, biotech, defense, energy, agriculture. It runs the gamut, A to Z. So sometimes the challenge is just trying to find that fit with that agency. And that's where a lot of time and effort is spent to get through that process. So it's highly competitive, it's complex, and it's complicated. So if you find doing your taxes difficult, you probably don't want to do SBIR. It's competitive, very competitive. And it's a federal grant or a contract. At the end of the day, that's what you will become, a grantee or a contractor. So you look at all the research that's done at Mayo Clinic or the University of Minnesota. How do those professors, researchers get their funding? They write really good proposals to a federal agency to support their research. The same thing happens in small businesses, but the big difference is, in a small business, the goal is to commercialize, so that you can create a new product or service that gets sold either domestically or worldwide. And that you create more jobs, you pay more taxes, you issue more patents. These are all the benefits that come along with competing in the SBIR and STTR program. So in Minnesota, we've had about over 100, probably 150 companies over the last 3+ years that have been successful in getting funding through SBIR. And it's been about a total about $533 million, which isn't bad. We're about 17th, 18th in the nation. We can do better. We have the skill sets, we have the brain power, we have the ideas and concepts. But just getting people introduced to the SBIR program and to actually go through the process of writing a competitive research proposal is a hard work. It's very competitive. I keep telling that. It's very competitive. So
We understand what you mean by competitive.
there's lots of competition for those dollars across the nation. There's probably well over 10,000 proposals that are submitted to all the agencies. And that's, I don't even really know what the number is, but I know it's probably 10,000. And they probably fund maybe 4,000 to 5,000.
10,000 annually?
Annually.
How many?
4,000 to 5,000.
So
4,000 to 5,000. And when you add up all the agencies, the 11 agencies.
that's 40 to 50%.
Well, these are rough numbers.
Okay.
These are rough numbers. I've never really actually done the calculation to add up all the proposals.
Is it 10,000 per agency?
No. So each agency has a different budget, which is in the slide presentation. So depending upon your technology and your commercial potential, you want to be able to target the appropriate agency that has an interest in what you're doing. And so you have to look at the competition. Some agencies have a lot of money, some agencies don't. So then it's a question of, well, how do we structure this project? Do we go after the Department of Defense? Do we go after the Navy? Do we go after the National Science Foundation? It just depends. We had a question.
Let's say I have an idea. What's the turnaround time? Would you to search for the agency, to do the application, to the response?
It generally is probably 6 to 9 months. So, and you really need to think about what's the commercial potential of your idea. Really sort that through before you, because it's part of the phase 1 proposal.
Another question is what I developed with that grant. Do I have the intellectual property rights to it?
Yes, good
Do I
question.
have to share it with the-
No, we don't want anything up from you. We just want you to create more jobs, pay more taxes. create new products and services. So the IP stays with the company, but the government has a royalty-free license to use it for its purposes, but trust me, 40 years or 30 plus years of SBIR funding, they've not engaged in that.
Please say that again, please. The government has what?
A royalty-free license to use it for its purposes, but they do not engage the small business to do that. I mean, it would defeat the whole purpose of the SBIR program.
So,
You're in good hands with the SBIR program and the IP rights.
could I, for example, let's say I develop something for an agency, could they then, if they want to use it, is there a way to getting fees from them for that? Or?
Well, this is how you get the federal agency to be your customer, is you commercialize it and then you sell it back to the government. And there's a provision in the legislation that puts, so this is especially true with Department of Defense opportunities, is that when the Navy, for example, puts a solicitation or puts a topic, research topic in the solicitation, they already have a pathway towards how that's going to be incorporated into the fleet, the Navy. And so that's really good news for a small business, because if you develop it out of a phase 1 or even a phase 2, and now you have this product or service that you can sell back to the government. They're a customer to you. This is a built-in market opportunity. This is huge. The Navy is highly recognized by Congress and maybe even perhaps the White House for being, really successful in transitioning and commercializing their SBIR funded projects into the fleet. And it's actually been the standard used by other agencies. It's a very, very important provision. In fact, the Navy has this annual conference every year in DC in June, where they bring in all these small businesses that are transitioning towards commercialization. And if they need partners with other large companies or with buying offices within the Department of Defense, there's that networking opportunity.
If I didn't want to write my own phase 1, roughly what would it cost to hire someone?
Probably $7,000 to $10,000
$10,000.
to write a proposal. But again, if you're going to be playing in the SBIR or STTR programs, and you're the person with the idea, the concept, nobody knows it better than you do. You can have other people help you, but it's your idea, it's your concept, it's your project, it's your baby. So we really encourage people to write their own proposal, and we review and edit proposals all the time. But I encourage people, write it. Because at the end of the day, if you get funded, you have to execute on what you wrote. Because you told them up front, you give me the money, this is what I will do with it. And then you get the money and you go, okay, now I can execute this project. It's highly competitive. So who looks at your proposal in the agency? It depends upon which agency, but many times they bring in outside reviewers. People with advanced degrees, people from industry, academia, to review these proposals and help make decisions about which projects will get funded. I've been a reviewer for NSF and for USDA. And I can assure you that the program, first of all, has a lot of integrity. All the information is kept confidential. We all have to sign conflict of interest. Huh? Anyway, so this is, it's a program that's full of integrity as far as the review and selection process is concerned.
Could you address just a little bit the content of the proposal from the research standpoint versus the actual production of the product? In other words, is the proposal looking at it from actually producing the product, or can it remain on that $150,000 or whatever for
and you have to do some research in order to prove or demonstrate the technical feasibility of that concept, that idea. That's what you do in phase 1. In phase 2 is where you actually do a lot of the bulk of the development work. We're not even at the product stage. I mean, you're probably at the end of phase 2, which is a 2-year project. You're probably going to get to a working prototype. Depending upon the project again, each one is very different.
So look at it almost like a clinical trial.
You could look at it that way. Each project is different because, what's the technology, what's the code project or a product or service that's being created or developed. Each one is different. I mean, I've got a listing here of all the projects that were funded in FY14, and just, take a look at that and pass it around. But that will be helpful.
We just want to transition into our I know people are already asking questions, but into a Q&A, official Q&A. So Brad, if you want to come back, official. Brad, if you want to come back up here, and then I'll turn it back over to Nick.
We should give that a round of applause.
Yeah,
I think so too.
All right, who said that? You get a phase 1.
So what you doing?
Yeah, a question on SBIR. The 11 or 12 government agencies in there. I mean, I would assume that they're looking for a use case clearly for the government as well as a commercial use case. How much weight does that have in the application for that of government use versus commercial?
Well, they're all looking for, okay, if it's a Department of Defense, there's definitely going to be a defense application, but you as a business need to be thinking about, well, where does this have a fit in the commercial marketplace as well? So you want to have what they say dual use, government and commercial, definitely. And not all agencies operate that way. So like the National Science Foundation, I refer to them as the venture capitalists of the SBIR program because they're looking for some really big hits. And they love to be able to talk about the fact that their companies have raised outside capital to match their funding. They love it.
Who are those individuals?
National Science Foundation. Well, they all like it, but NSF is really prolific in that way.
Great. So, just taking a quick note here. So, hey, good morning, man. So anyway, maybe just starting with a couple of the really, really basic questions that I'm sure people know, but just to make sure we don't forget to ask about them. So, do you have to pay SBIR funding back at any time?
No, it's a grant or a contract.
Good.
It's non-dilutive funding.
Which is really, really nice. So maybe the next question might be, is what are the elements of a good proposal for funding?
Well, there's really solid technological innovation. You have to always be asking yourself, what's the innovation? We're looking for game-changing, disruptive kinds of ideas or concepts. One of the NSF program managers many years ago used to say, well, gee, why didn't I think of that? That's a really great idea. It starts with that, and then it's the technical team. Who's the principal investigator or the project director? Who's leading the research effort? This person is extremely important during the review process and the selection process. So it's the PI, the project director, and the technical team. So that's why I say, it's rare, it's absolutely rare these days to have a project where there's only the PI working on the project. You need to have collaboration from other researchers, collaborators, experts, people that are skilled in their area. You have to have letters of support from potential commercialization partners. This is In some ways, it's like a business plan, but it's really focused on the R&D.
And are those things necessary for the phase 1 funding as well
Yes.
as later phases?
Yes. Yes. The more that you can talk about the significance of the innovation and then what the commercial potential is for whatever you're working on is really important in phase 1.
And is it always technical innovations that are funded, or are business model innovations also funded?
Well, what do you mean when you say tactical?
No, technical.
Oh, technical.
Yeah.
It's R&D. It's scientific, technical R&D.
So they
With
wouldn't.
commercialization potential.
Okay. So they wouldn't necessarily fund a business like Brian's.
No,
Or sorry, Brad's. Brad's. Okay.
no.
And so there was a question earlier, which was, how long does it take to get SBIR funding? And just in case anyone didn't hear the answer to that, how long does it take typically?
Well, just to get through a phase 1, it can go from 6 to 9 months, depending upon what your technology is and which agency is interested in what you're doing. So they each have a schedule where they release their solicitations throughout the year. So you might find out about SBIR like today. Yeah, I got this idea, but the agency that's the best fit for what you're proposing to do may not have their solicitation open until December. That's okay. That is okay because now you've got several months to get your act together and to get a proposal drafted and submitted. The more time you have, the better off you are. And the reality is, I tell people this all the time, the whole process, when you look from phase 1 to the end of phase 2, we're looking at a 3 to 5 year timeline. So this is not something, this funding is not for something that, well, if I had the money today, I'd be out in the marketplace in 6 to 9 months. It doesn't work with SBIR. We're funding R&D, high-risk R&D with commercial potential.
So, understanding that, is it possible for someone to operate a marketplace and engage in this, in SBIR research at the same time?
Absolutely. We have lots of small businesses that, there's one in particular in St. Paul, that ongoing manufacturing firm for many years, and 10 years ago I went out to talk with them about SBIR, and they wrote a proposal, submitted it to the Department of Defense, I think that either the Navy or the Air Force, and it was selected for funding. They had a hotshot MIT graduate that wrote the proposal, which helped a lot, but I've never seen a company move so fast. So how that company is using SBIR is it's supporting its advanced R&D with the whole goal of commercializing new products for the future. So this is how existing small businesses really need to think about using this program to support their advanced R&D efforts.
So you talked a little bit about intellectual property and the fact that the government would have a non-exclusive license to the technology that you've obviously that they have funded. Do they have the ability to transfer that license to a competitor, or is it something that they have to use for their own use?
It's for their own use. You're asking a very difficult question because the government does have what they call march-in rights. But that is not exercised. They really want the small business to be successful in commercializing their technology and to profit from it. This is a small business program. And so these IP rights are very attractive compared to other federal grant or contract programs that support R&D.
But if the technology is innovative and game-changing enough, certainly they may have some interest in that.
In a product or service that they could potentially use, yes. As it would be a customer. They would buy that product or service.
That's not what the disclaimer says. As a customer, it allows them rights to use the IP without licensing or without fees.
It's a royalty-free license to use it for its purposes.
Can the panelists ask a question?
By all means.
From a financial related standpoint, Is there any problem getting other financing?
No.
With what you
No.
have in the agreement and so on? Okay.
No, it's where, as a company, you need to look at all your sources of capital, whether it be debt or equity, depending upon where you are in your business pathway. I mean, the SBIR program is from 1 employee up to 500 employees, and you have to be independently owned and operated, principally businesses in the U.S. There's some other caveats to that, but it's generally the small business definition that's used by the SBA. And it's, so we have, lots of companies that, get their SBIR. They start their company with an SBIR, and then we have companies that are already existing small businesses that, come into the program and they continue to do SBIR funding.
I actually have a question about factoring. So when someone is in a position where they need to get invoice funding, what prevents them from going to a company that does factoring? Or is there another source of funding that they can seek that there's a competitive advantage for, or is factoring really the only type of funding that fills that need?
Well, maybe you can explain the question a little more. I mean, there are a lot of other types of funding.
Why would someone go to, what are some of the other avenues someone would go to, and how do you educate them to come to you instead of going to these other sources?
Good question, and I did not cover it in the presentation. And typically when there's a transitional stage like growth or a customer coming to you and demanding receivables and you don't have the assets to carry it, a lot of times the traditional credit lines might limit your credit line depending on the stage. I don't know if that answers your question. And so that's a good reason then to turn to something like factoring at that point.
Another question about factoring. I mean, if your customer doesn't pay the invoice, you're just not really able to come back with credit signs. Is factoring changing now, so you can actually come de facto with a discount from the collection agency?
Yeah, what you're getting into is recourse and non-recourse, and in the commercial transportation side, both are available. Generally in the business side, it's all recourse, which means, yes, if the customer doesn't pay, then the factoring company comes back to the client for the funds. However, generally, good factoring companies never get anybody in that position because we're doing our due diligence up front. And very, very seldom does that happen. And if it does happen, it's not like a collection agency that says, okay, now you're going to pay it back right away. That's why there's a reserve, and it's just paid over a certain amount of time.
Follow-up question. Are factoring companies getting into the collection business for companies because you have a wide range of on-staff, legal staff, and everything else? So I can outsource my collection to the factoring based on a discount.
Factoring, at least from our standpoint, and generally the competitors I've talked with, we're not a collection agency. And I've had somebody ask me, can I just hire you for that because I've got certain money outstanding, 60 days, 90 days out, 100 days out. My answer is you certainly can do that. We can help with that, but I'm going to turn around in 30 days if it's 100 days out and just come back to you anyway. So here's a resource. There are actually people that do that, focus on collections. And so generally I'll turn that resource or recommend that resource. Does that answer your question? Okay.
On the factoring side, there may be small businesses who are very small. Could you talk a little bit about how small of a customer are you willing to work with? In other words, define a little bit about the constraints of the prospective business that you're working with.
Okay. Talking from the factoring industry standpoint, generally you like to see $50,000 to $100,000 in receivables a month, which is $1 million business. However, probably the factoring companies in this room, like us, we don't have any minimum. So it just has to make sense for both. If you want to factor a customer, that's $1,000. And it makes sense for you to do that because it helps you achieve the goals that you need to achieve. That option's there for you. at least with our company and a few others out there. And again, there's no cost to sign up and that kind of thing. So from our standpoint, and if you ask the owners, and by the way, I am not an owner, and we do have the two owners. They probably will say they'd like to see the $50,000 a month, but that's not a requirement. We have no minimum. So hopefully, does that answer your question?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Maybe what is the smallest customer you've ever served?
You know, I'll answer that in two ways. The smallest invoice we funded is $10, but that was within a pile of invoices, of course, you know. The smallest customer, I suppose it was $1,000, because we don't have any time limits either. So if you just want to do it for that customer for that period, and that's what happened in this case, they did it. It was a $1,000 invoice, and the customer didn't buy again, so that was it.
So maybe in sort of in similar context, you talked a little bit about obviously the fact that the capital that you provide businesses enables them to grow. Do the businesses that you serve typically have other funding sources that they use primarily for their growth, or are they really primarily using the funding source of their invoices?
Well, the number one would be the credit line at the bank. There's a couple things with that. There's a familiarity, and it's less expensive. But if the credit line becomes restricted, whatever source it is, then that's when factoring would come into to play. I don't know if I answered that totally. Okay.
Yeah, another question, and I missed the first presentation, but it seems more talking about creation of tangible goods and assets. What about services-based companies, software as a service type companies? Have you seen those within these models? SBIR or that model for funding?
Are you talking about a SaaS company?
Yes, yeah, something where you're not producing tangible goods.
Yeah, SaaS is supported by SBIR funding.
Definitely in the factoring side too, that's a big part. Probably the top tier are the service businesses, manufacturing and distribution. So whatever it is, cleaning service, IT service, that kind of thing, yeah.
Do you think we could just quickly define SaaS for the audience?
Oh, SaaS is software as a service.
All right, who would like to ask the last question of the morning?
So on the SBIR, what is an example of when the government has exercised that option with the rights to?
It happened once that I know of in 30-some years. And it was because the small company had developed some technology for the Department of Defense. And they really needed it. And so they wanted the small business to transfer the technology to Lockheed Martin. But I don't know what happened to that, but I know that was a big battle. That's once. I mean, we have, in Minnesota, we've got over 100 companies that produce products or services based on their SBIR funding. And the government is a customer to them. And large companies or other small companies, I mean, worldwide. So this is, I would encourage you to look at the SBIR.gov and look at the IP section where they talk about the intellectual property rights of the SBIR program.
And then maybe just one last question, unless you have one, Brad, as well.
Well, actually, I just wanted to follow up on the question you asked, and again, it all ties into if the traditional funding source or credit line is restricted or unavailable. I've actually helped a lot of customers with the second-tier credit line. That sounds bad, but it's not. I mean, it's basically the same interest rate, maybe a little bit higher. And there's a lot less requirements with that. And then use factoring. In addition to that, to make sure the cash is there to continue to buy a product as well. So there's a lot of different ways and alternatives to structure out there, with the overall goal, of course, trying to get to the long-term lending.
So the final question I was going to ask actually was also around intellectual property, and I don't know for everyone in the room if they're aware of this, but the United States has recently joined the rest of the world in a first-to-file, patent system. And so the question is, is the application for the grant or the proposal maintained confidential, which would then enable the individual who makes the filing to reserve international patent filing rights? Or instead, could it be considered a public disclosure, which would then make the individual waive the right to filing internationally?
No, it is not, it's not a public disclosure. All the information that is submitted to an agency for review is kept confidential. And the only time that anything is disclosed in the public domain is the abstract, if the project is funded.
Cool. Well, thank you.